This is what Crafton had to say on his Facebook page and what he also posted to all of his social media platforms. Here is what wasn't caught on video. First, let's address the sucker punch. Before the camera started rolling, I approached Nick and said, "Hey." When he turned around, I said, "What the?" To which he looked right at me and threatened me. That is when it all went to hell. I had his attention, words were exchanged, all before anything physical took place, so I did not sucker punch the guy. There may not be video, but there were plenty of eyewitnesses. Second, what people don't take into account is that he all but sucker punched me at 200 miles per hour. The way he pushed my truck gave me no ability to get out of a situation, and he was told multiple times during that race the way he was pushing people was going to cause a wreck and going to get people hurt. There was a consistent pattern of certain drivers having a lack of respect on the track, and it was time for someone to say something. Am I proud that it got physical? No. But last time I checked, everyone on that track is a grown adult. If a man looks at me and threatens me, I'm going to react, especially when tempers are already flared from being wrecked on the track. I apologize to my team, my sponsors and partners, my family, and the NASCAR community for the negativity and for taking attention away from a good day of racing at Talladega. Now, as there often are, there are two sides to this story. This is what Nick Sanchez's mother wrote on her Facebook page. "Thank you to everyone for all the calls and texts after yesterday's race. Nick is doing good. We all really appreciate your concern and feel your love. For those who don't know what exactly happened, after the race, Nick and his PR right-hand lady, Christy, were walking next to each other back to his hauler. Renee and I were about 10 steps behind them. Then in a flash, another driver literally came out of nowhere. We think he was hiding behind some tires. Then tapped Nick on his shoulder from behind. When Nick turned his face to see who it was, he then sucker punched Nick. Didn't say a word, no confrontation, just flat out blindsided him. The driver had already changed out of his fire suit into plain clothes to blend in with everyone else. Obviously, he was waiting for Nick to walk by. He had it planned. Like Nick said, it was a cheap shot. Anyone who knows Nick knows he's not an aggressor and would never do that to another driver or anyone else, but he didn't even have a chance to defend himself. As a parent, the last thing you expect to see is someone assault and attack your son right in front of you. It's hard to put into words. Sickening is an understatement. I don't know what else to say. I'm still shaken up and extremely sad. This was all because of an on-track incident which happens all the time. That's racing. After watching the video, most people are stating it wasn't Nick's fault. Regardless of whose fault, to not even come up to Nick and talk about it and have a discussion is so classless and cowardly, especially coming from a 47-year-old veteran driver who should be a role model. Yes, a 47-year-old taking a cheap shot at Nick. Brandon, I know you certainly shared some thoughts in our private chat and before we came on the air here. What are your overall opinions on what happened on track and then in the garage area of the subsequent altercation between Matt Crafton and Nick Sanchez?
Listen, Ben, I've never really been, just on a personal aside, never really been a fan of fighting in the sport. Just period. It doesn't appeal to me very much. Did I like 1979's And There's a Fight? Yeah, I did. Just a little bit. I don't know why I like that one, but it's just an iconic moment. But I think there's a difference between those iconic fights and the ones where it's just, okay, why? It's a real head scratcher. And there's so many different sources we have for this. But what really bugs me is we don't really see Matt Crafton anywhere in that video. At least I can't. There's claims that he took his fire suit off and he's now in his street clothes so he can kind of blend in. And it's just so many variables going on this, man. I mean, it's not immediately after the race. It was apparently like an hour or so or some good amount of elapsed time after the checkered flag that we had this happen. So tempers already had their chance to flare down. So it just doesn't look good for Matt Crafton. Again, being a 47-year-old and a big veteran of the sport, of the series, multi-champion, and coming in and finding this guy. It's equally not as good for a 22-year-old to say he's going to explicitly murder you at Homestead multiple times and the blood all over his face. Sure, you could say that in driver speak that means he's going to dump him at Homestead, but actually, if any other human being says that to somebody, out loud and it's on video, that's premeditated murder. That's, I'm going to kill you at place. Like, I hope they both get the accurate amount of consequences and suspension or fine or whatever they've got to do. I know they got to look back at precedent. I know they got to look at all the evidence that they want to look at. But I don't think that the big takeaway I had on Saturday was there's no good guy here. Don't think for a minute I think either of these guys is on the right side and the other one's at fault. It's both a despicable thing from both sides. And also, I saw this other bit from Sean Orna on Twitter. Don't know if this is confirmed or not, but he said, and I quote, "Sanchez admitted fault for the wreck over the radio the lap after, so anyone blaming Crafton for this is just delusional." And also he said, quote, "This wreck sent someone to the hospital. Crafton has every right to be mad, not to mention Sanchez has been a wrecking ball all season long." Of course, that's not a reference to anything factual. That's just his opinion. But the fact that Sanchez allegedly admitted fault for the wreck over the radio the lap after, I decided to screenshot that because that was a different source for me to take things into account. But just baffled by this. In closing, baffled by this and not happy with either one of them. It's an eyesore on the sport, and it's just despicable.
I believe he said "my bad" over the radio.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but I believe I saw a tweet that was live tweeting during the race. So he came over the radio and said that. So that would fall in the line with that. Matthew Owens here in the chat room saying, "I'm sorry, but as usual, it was everyone else's fault." But Matt's, and Matthew, I know you and I have this discussion as well. Anyone who watches this show regularly knows that I have repeatedly praised Matt Crafton for his longevity and the career that he's had. He's a 3-time champion of the sport, a 15-time winner in the Truck Series. As far as I'm concerned, he deserves Hall of Fame consideration whenever he decides to hang up the helmet. His consecutive start streak, if you want to put it into perspective, it started before his current ThorSport teammate Hailie Deegan was even born. That's how long he's been a truck lifer. That's how long he's been in this series. That's how long he has been the face of a national touring division in this sport.
Since like 2000 or something, right?
Yeah, the 2000 season finale. That's the race before, the penultimate race of 2000. That's the last time Crafton missed a truck race before he made his debut. I mean, it's something that I don't think we talk about often enough. When it comes, like Jeff Gordon's streak gets a lot of attention from Ricky Rudd's before that. I mean, we got to talk about what Matt Crafton's done in the Truck Series. It's just phenomenal. And I am so, I mean, Brandon, I don't disagree with you. I share your anger. I share your frustration. But I don't know how much energy I have for anger and frustration because all of my emotions, all of my energy is consumed with disappointment. I am so disappointed that this, first of all, that it happened between any two drivers, but in particular, that it happened with Matt Crafton. Matt Crafton is somebody who should be the last person you're expecting to get involved in something like this. He should be, as Sanchez's mother wrote in her Facebook post, and I will, in fairness, admit that I think both of them, presented their arguments and their side, and made their case, and maybe both brought up some decent points. And, we'll see. NASCAR will take all that evidence, and everyone's innocent until proven guilty. But from what we have heard from the eyewitnesses, it is a terrible look for somebody in his mid to late 40s who has been around this sport longer than Nick Sanchez has been alive to do that to. I mean, no incident on the track should be bad enough to justify blooding somebody's face and potentially breaking his nose. I don't know exactly what the extent of Nick's injuries are. Again, I'm sure we'll figure that all out in the coming weeks before Homestead. But I will just say this. If this is how Crafton's streak ends with a suspension, I can't say I'm going to be heartbroken over it.
No.
It's going to be incredibly disappointing that would be how the streak goes out. But I don't think a suspension would be unjustified here. I know that NASCAR hasn't typically, and again, we'll talk about the precedent here. And, we had this discussion on the show last year after Vegas with Bubba Wallace. I predicted that NASCAR would not give Bubba Wallace a suspension because they had not stepped in for intentional wrecks like that in the past before, at least not on a consistent basis. But credit to NASCAR, they did step in. They gave him a one-race suspension, and then when Chase Elliott did something similar this year, they held firm to their precedent. Even though Chase Elliott's the most popular driver, they gave him a one-race suspension for that.
Yeah.
I will say this, at the bare minimum, what Crafton and Sanchez did was in the garage area, not at 200 miles an hour with their cars. So I will say that if you give Crafton and even Sanchez as well, to your point, Brandon, because I don't think those comments are going to go over too well. If you give them a suspension for physical and verbal abuse outside the car, I think that's fine. I think that's justified personally. But I think intentionally right rear hooking somebody at 180 miles an hour, I think that's a 3-race suspension now at the very least. You're telling me that something, a discussion gone wrong outside the car that leads to some unpleasant things and unpleasant images, that's worth the same as, Kyle Petty made this point on NBC last year as well. If a crew member has a wheel nut not get securely fastened, that comes off, they get a 4-week vacation, but we're only going to give Bubba Wallace 1. We're only going to give Chase Elliott 1. The optics of that are just not consistent and not good.
Yeah.
I would think that if Crafton gets a 1-race suspension for this, or if Sanchez gets a 1-race suspension for this, maybe we need to start looking at how we're policing other incidents that happen on the track as well. And to your point and, the points that others have made as well, Greg Van Alst, got injured, and Stuart Friesen had to go to the hospital as well in a separate incident. I mean, this is a very dangerous sport, arguably the most dangerous track, the fastest track that we go to running in a pack like this. I mean, it's just an all-around awful situation. I just feel so terrible for NASCAR that we have to have this conversation, but this is the lead story once again. But again, I think if they come down with a suspension here, it's not going to be unjustified.
Yeah, absolutely. Then I hope they do. I mean, if his streak is ended, then good. I mean, you're going to reap what you sow here in this case, and for both ends, you need to reap what you sow here. And I know the suspension caliber is kind of inconsistent as far as vehicular intent and fist fight intent after the race, like you said there. But still, I'm curious to see. It's out of our hands now. I'm just curious to see where NASCAR goes with it tomorrow.
And again, apologies to Matthew Owens, because I know he's in the chat. I know he's watching this, but I can't help but think of Jeff Gordon at Phoenix in 2012, and something that some people said should have warranted a suspension there. Did the fact that Jeff Gordon was on track to pass Ricky Rudd in a few years, and NASCAR maybe not wanting to intervene with that consecutive start streak, did that maybe play? Or is it just the fact that Jeff Gordon's a 4-time champion? Maybe he's earned the right to have an incident like that. And I would hope that we wouldn't factor that in, but we always talk about NASCAR being so consistently inconsistent. That's the only thing they're consistent on, right? Is their inconsistencies. I would hope that they look just as what happened with Bubba Wallace last year, and that kind of setting a precedent for intentional wrecks. I would hope that we look at whatever comes of this, that it sets a precedent for the future in terms of fights that get this out of hand. And I see Joe commented on you're bringing up the 79 Daytona 500. I think that's iconic for a whole, slew of reasons aside from just the fight. It was Ken Squire's call in the booth. It was the fact that, there was a massive storm on the East Coast that had everybody snowed in, and everybody was watching the first live flag to flag broadcast of the Daytona 500. And, again, I don't know. I wasn't around in 1979. I can't tell you for sure how I would have felt, if I had been a 24-year-old watching that in 79 as it was unfolding in real time. I'd imagine I probably wouldn't have been too thrilled with those actions, given, how you and I, Brandon, feel about fights, generally speaking. But, it's so hard to rule on these things consistently because, and again, I saw a tweet from, I'm not going to reveal who it is. I'm sure you can, if you dig deep enough, you can find it. But somebody on Twitter who has a fairly substantial following said that we've gone so soft that fights are part of a sport's DNA. And if you don't like it, you can just go watch tennis.
Right.
And, that last part, that's what bothers me the most when people use that argument, because they're the same people that are going to turn around when we get another Adam Stern tweet that says, oh, the ratings are down 8% from last year. And they're going to be like, oh, that was a great race. I wonder why aren't people watching?
Yeah.
Did you not tell people that if they don't like what they're seeing, they like? It just bothers me so much that, again, I take no pleasure in having to have this conversation again. But we have to. We have to. It's what everybody's talking about. It's the top story, and people are firmly divided on both sides, and they don't know what's going to happen because there is no precedent. We've let these things get out of hand, and you can always look back, hindsight being 2020. But did the fact that we let some of these previous fights that didn't get to that point go in the past, has that let it get out of hand this much to the point where this is where we are now, and that only further bothers me.
Yeah, you brought up Jeff Gordon from 2012 at Phoenix. I think I didn't see NASCAR too much in the early 2010s, but I feel like if that were to go on in 2023, I think you would get a different verdict on Tuesday. For some reason, I think NASCAR officiating and NASCAR as a whole in the early 2010s is very different from where NASCAR is now in the early 2020s.
Yeah. Well, but again, Kyle Busch wrecked Ron Hornaday at Texas. He got sat down for the week, or for the rest of the weekend, rather. Carl Edwards put Brad Keselowski in the catch fence at Atlanta the year before, and he only got away with a probation. So, again, it was the boys have at it era. There was no consistency. Mm-hmm. It was a very frustrating time, I think, for race fans, to have to deal with. And again, it's not like these are a couple of starting park guys, or the, with all due respect, the Spencer Gallagher, John West Townley fight, those guys were, that fight was comical for other reasons. It didn't get nearly as bloody as this one, but those guys weren't household names. Like when you have Jeff Gordon chasing down Clint Boyer chasing down Jeff Gordon because Gordon ended his championship hopes at Phoenix, and Kyle Busch putting Ron Hornaday into the wall at Texas and ending his title hopes. Like these are big names. And Matt Crafton is a 3-time champion of the sport. He is a big name in the truck series. It's just an all-around awful situation.